Hello and welcome back to Roundtable. In the first year of the pandemic, over half of theatres created work for online. It was a much needed shift for accessibility for culture and the arts. However, after only 18 months, half of those theatres had stopped making work digitally. In today's Roundtable discussion, we're going to be looking at the future of theatre on screen. We're going to be taking a look around why theatres moved to making work online, what that looks like when you merge cinema with theatre and the different skills that are required for each of those things. We're also going to take a general look at audiences, accessibility, and what it's going to look like in the future. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by theatre director, producer, and cinematic theatre director, Jen Hayes, and Professor Rachel McLean, director of Liverpool Screen School at Liverpool John Moores University. So, first of all, I'm just going to start off by asking you to introduce yourselves, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine. As you said, I'm Jen Hayes, and I'm a theatre director, and I've always had a filmic quality to my work, and always been coming from that medium. But then, obviously, over the past 10, 15 years, with technology, it's become an even more pragmatic part of my work as well. And my company, Cut to the Chase Productions, which is based in Liverpool, we've done lots of productions and pieces with different other companies, and I was an associate director of London Artist Projects as well.
So hi, I'm Professor Rachel McLean, Professor in Digital Media and Director of Liverpool Screen School at Liverpool John Moores University. The Screen School includes the disciplines that you've mentioned that come together within digital theatre. So that's creative writing, drama, media production, film studies and journalism in there as well. So we create the talent pipeline, and this presents major challenges for us that we need to work out how we're going to surmount those challenges and get people working in cross-disciplinary ways. I guess I come from a background of digital marketing, so I'm quite interested in the user experience and the looking at what audiences want and kind of how much they've had to pay for these kind of, which I think is quite a neglected area. We need to know what the audiences want in order to provide it and make sure that this survives. My staff and I have done a couple of little projects around theatre outside the boundaries of or performance outside of the theatre boundaries. So I think we've got some work there going on in the early stages, but we would like to develop that and work out some of the answers to the questions that you're going to be asking. I think
that's great, and I think that is obviously a really interesting jumping off point then, because I think when theatres closed in the pandemic, people did move their work online, and for a lot of theatre makers, I think that was their first time working with digital. Some were always digital theatre makers, of course, but it did present a really interesting opportunity for people who had potentially had these ideas that they had envisioned to be performed in a traditional stage setting, and they began to think, well, actually, now that opportunity's been taken from me, how might I reimagine my ideas for screen? And I think, it presented a lot of people with opportunity, but also with challenges, like you say, particularly in skills gaps. So, Jen, I'm going to come to you first, because I know you have created a project which you're bringing here to us this weekend, which is, which could quite easily have been performed in a traditional theatre setting, and you've chosen that cinematic route. So could you tell us a little bit, first of all, about the project and how you came to the decision really to present it in the way that you did?
Yeah, well, it's Hedda after Ibsen, and it's a reimagining of Henrik Ibsen's Hedda Gabler, and it's starring David Hoyle, it was commissioned by Edge Hill University, Dr. Cathy Butterworth, and we undertook several R&Ds at Edge Hill University with the intention of it being a live production, but as a live production it would have incorporated lots of digital. It was a multimedia piece as well. So that was what we were working towards, and but there was always the intention as well that we would transpose it over to film as well. Anyway, it really couldn't have happened any funnier really, because on the day that it was meant to go into tech, we got closed down. The university got closed down, and that was it. And so we were in limbo. We were like in this limbo land. Everybody was, with COVID, and it was such a terrible time for everybody. And then I'd also done an adaptation of a play, a touring piece that I'd directed for London Artist Projects called Truth to Power Cafe, and I'd adapted that at Conway Hall. And that had been a finalist in the Encom Awards the year previously. And so I'd already had that experience of taking something that was, for all intents and purposes, a live production and transposing it over to film. For me, that was it's a lovely way to work, because I think it's all about language. And as a practitioner and as a director, I'm really in search of, I'm always looking to the future. I think that you have to be, as an artist, you have to be sort of keeping up with what's going on and what's happening, and really, because, always, as well as a director, I'm always thinking of audience as well. As Rachel was saying, that's always at the forefront of what we're doing. So transposing it over was, I think some of those elements were already in there, because my work has that filmic element anyway. So, for example, the set that was built, we couldn't actually fit it into Soho Theatre, because what I've not put in is that Soho Theatre came along then and said, we would like to pick that up and support you now with the next commission, and Arts Council did as well. And so when the actual COVID was on, we filmed it in Soho Theatre, and because there was nobody using the theatre at that time, it gave us really free rein to be able to have that space, and to work freely. We already had the set built, a fantastic, amazing set, wouldn't fit in, so we just had to adapt with things, with that. And also, I was working with scale from the live piece, and that scale was of David. We filmed him on green screen, and we wanted him to appear not as holograms, but on this very fine gauze, and it was like as though there was a huge image, a huge David within the room. That transposed really, really well to film. So what we have is we have a film language and we have a theatre language, and what I'm in search of in my cinematic reimagining in a creation is, how does those language speak to each other, and what is the new language? And there is a new language, and that has to be created. And I think, like you were saying, you were saying that it was about people were forced into doing it, during the COVID, and there were, and so things were. I think if you've got the language of theatre, you can have that beautifully well, but you also need that other language as well. You need to understand how they work independently and how they speak to each other as well. And then it's alchemy, isn't it? So you put those two things together and you go, okay, what are we going to make now? So I thought that was wonderfully exciting to be able to do that, to be able to get those two mediums, bring them together and go, wow, this is a new thing that's being created. The one thing that I was in search of, and I think that people, when you speak to them, really want to find within that alchemy, is that live experience. Fortunately, with the work that I've done with the Truth to Power Cafe and with Heather after Ibsen, the feedback has been that they actually feel as though it's a live experience. And I think that's where you're placing the audience in relation to the viewer, obviously, within that, breaking through that fourth wall and knowing when to do that, when to bring them in, and also drawing on popular culture. And when we look at popular culture now and how people are, what their experiences are of watching film, how they are, what their concentration is, what their expectations are, then that's all very much part and parcel, I think, of what we need to be doing and incorporating within it.
Definitely. It's really interesting. I think, that element of what point you touch upon the audience, because, for cinema and theatre, it's a really crucial part. If you're going out of the house, which is something people couldn't do for quite a long period of time, how do you recreate that feeling of the collective when you watch both art forms? And then, how do they differ from each other? Because, a lot of the work that we do at Unity, so we make 70% of our live work available to watch online as well. And I remember one of the artists we were speaking to saying, are you going to keep the audience response in the cut, or is it going to be a silent version as such without the audience reaction? And I found that really interesting, because I felt like that particular company, they wanted the audience at home to take their cues from the audience here. Whereas I think in, you know, the cinematic theatre that you're describing, the cues are within how the show is created, I think.
Yeah.
And they are quite different practices, really, aren't they? And
yeah, I mean, I think what you're talking about there is the examples of, I think television-wise, we've seen that, haven't we, within televised, like situation comedies, and you know, or they've put like the clapping in, or and that's a response for the audience, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I think and it's very interesting to explore that, I would say, as well, which is great. I've never even gone that, you know, to think about that. I think that's really interesting.
Sorry, I was just going to say that whole culture clash of, remember the first time going to see something live streamed from, I think it was the National Theatre, Jodie Comer as the barrister. Amazing, so much energy, you know, really moving performance. But that whole thing of sitting in the cinema, yes, at a theatre, do we have popcorn? Can we speak to our, you know, the different expectations, as you said, the different languages of being in a cinema and that cinematic.
Yeah.
Although we knew we were there watching a live stream from the National Theatre, so there's a certain code of how you behave with that. So so it's interesting how those worlds interact, and you know, what could come out of that, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, the National Theatre is a very good example, isn't it, of, I mean, they have a lot of money. So I mean, it's multi-camera, I think, isn't it, what they're doing. So I think in that they are capturing a theatrical experience, and that's one thing, I think, in itself. I think that there's, for me, thinking about, you know, artistically, and this new language that we're going to be creating and we want to be working towards, then there's a lot to be explored within that, isn't there? And that, you know, and it is expensive. So how do we, is it the film industry? What is it? Where does it come from? Who is going to be? Does it have to be? Do the film industry care? Do you know what I mean? It's like, you know, these are all the questions, aren't they?
That's interesting, though. This sort of, you touched there on the art of the possible, and I think that's a key thing, isn't it? Because it seems, you know, you as a director, writer, producer, you're very clued up technologically, it seems, but a lot of people have their niche, they have their strengths, don't they? So someone may be a writer, maybe an actor, and don't really understand the art of the possible. So what is possible if you put them together with a creative technologist or a computer scientist?
Absolutely.
You know, what could... And I think that's in our education system, as well as sort of training film schools, drama schools. We're not very good at that in this country yet, and that needs to develop for me. I think to have that melting pot of throwing the disciplines in and working at that intersection of creative art, digital technology, computer science, you know, throwing all that in together and letting people, you know, investing in that, just this sort of playground of what could come out of putting these people together, an ideas person with a person who can make it happen, and then, you know, things that we haven't. At the moment, it is very embryonic and almost in some ways pedestrian, is that live streaming, as you say, theatre, you know, in the 2D screen to 2D. That's, you know, there must be more to it than that. There is more to it, but how do we find out what there is and actually start to create that? And you're right, it needs investment.
Yeah, it does need investment. And also it's about, and we're thinking about the audience as well. We're thinking about an audience in theatrical terms as there, but I'm thinking about audiences in lots of different places within that, what's happening within that film and how they're experiencing. So that comes on to the immersive, doesn't it, you know, within that. But then we've got all these wonderful theatre buildings as well, you know, and how do we, what's going to be happening within those. I think all of those things about where the audience are placed inside of the cinematic theatre experience is very powerful as well.
And the potential for the autonomy around that, so things like remote control cameras, could you have something at home?
Beautiful.
Like a games
console? Absolutely. Yeah. There's so many possibilities around that, isn't there, that is just like, and I think, how do we make things like that? How can we get those experiences in? How can we make them cheaper?
I think that's it, and how do you make them more normal and a regular part of people's practice? Yeah,
absolutely. Like, you know, with like photography, like and filming with the phones, and you know, we're getting the quality's getting more and more and more. So how do we do that?
People are quite adept to making things now. I think that's what the social media generation is teaching us. I think particularly with platforms like TikTok, they are to be explored, I think. And it's an interesting point, the one you made around the kind of norms of being in a theatre setting, because I think for me, one of the interesting things that digital theatre allows is to overcome some access barriers that theatres actually do present. So in one respect for our audiences, so, you know, like I said, we make a lot of our work online, and truthfully, the audience really has fluctuated. There are points in the year where people are desperate to download that film and pay for it because it sold out in person. They never had a chance. They saw the big social media kind of response and thought, God, I'm so glad I'm getting a second chance to see that. But in other senses, now, like theatre, restaurant, bars, comedy, music has all reopened in the live, and people have craved that face-to-face.
Yeah.
We have times where, you know, the sales aren't particularly there for digital. And then so people do say, you know, what is the commitment and why is it still there with such a fluctuating audience? And I think the first point is that it gives our artists a chance to consider the things that you've spoken around, that their audience won't just be sat there. They may be sat elsewhere. They could be all around you depending on where the camera is. But then also, not a lot of there's a lot of people who can't attend a theatre or find the space intimidating. But the space in their own home, they're quite used to consuming media in it. And I think for us, you know, we found that in our first year of putting our 70% of our programme online, more than half watched from outside of Liverpool. And, you know, for our artists, that's great. Like, you know, we're constantly banging the drum of how brilliant this city is and the brilliant stories being told here. But, you know, trains aren't great to the north. You can't really even get between the two major cities that easily. And, you know, how do these artists have a chance of getting their stories seen more widely, and how does Liverpool have a chance of showing themselves as a brilliant theatre city? And I feel like digital has answered that question. And we make a lot of what we do for Liverpool audiences to be able to digest it. But we were surprised and pleased when those results came in to show that more people were tuning in from outside of the city, because it meant more people were seeing the brilliant stuff happening here. And so instantly that's a barrier broken down with geography, costs associated with travel.
And also you kind of touched on that sort of diversity in people who wouldn't get to a theatre. So if I don't know if you talk about widening participation, we talk about this in the university quite often, but if you imagine, you know, your group of teenage boys who would not be seen dead in a theatre, stick a headset on, virtual reality headset, and say it's Shakespeare in there, you know, so it's a way of reaching beyond your traditional audiences and democratising, I guess, the whole theatre experience. Because
there are so many platforms now. I mean, you know, we worked with an artist who was exploring Twitch, which is a streaming platform for gaming, and that's a really popular thing. People do sit at home and they watch hour-long clips of someone playing a game, and that is watching somebody perform something. It might not be theatre, but they are doing something, and you are passive in that, but you're watching somebody else experience it. And you know, these things are all linked, and they are quite normal, but interesting that the different demographics that engage with different things. I think using the phrase digital theatre might sometimes be a little bit off-putting potentially, in the sense that, do I need to have access to theatre already and understand what theatre is and how theatre is performed? Whereas actually when you begin to merge that crossover of film and theatre and become more cinematic, it does open doors really for people drawing on the cues of cinema for theatre.
You know, before film there was theatre. Theatre, everything comes from that, you know, the vernacular, the secular, you know, going back to the Greeks and all that. So Aristotle, and so a lot of the great film actors and the great directors came from theatre, and so they were in search of this new medium. So maybe that's what we have to do. Maybe we're going, what are we as, you know, what is theatre now? What you were saying, we have to be theatre. So is theatre seen as this middle class sort of pursuit that only people who have come from a certain place or a certain thing that they do, or which I'm sure none of us agree with. But how do we define theatre as an art form?
Yeah.
Film as an art form, you know, it's got its credentials, hasn't it, in terms of it's in everybody's house every day of the year, every night of the week, you know, it's certainly in mine, you know. So and then theatre has got this sort of a different just a different understanding of it. And it's that is because we go, well, everybody has to be together in the same place. But like you said before, it's the same with film. We go to cinemas, don't we? And we gather together and we have that live experience.
From both of your experiences, I'd be really interested to hear, what the differences are in making it and what the skills gap might potentially be, because we've got a lot of artists who we see who perform on stage and they may have projection behind them that they film separately, and there's a marrying of film and theatre in that sense, but they aren't interacting. They are two pieces of performance that are benefiting each other for moving a plot along potentially. And I think how can we what was it like for you to kind of almost transition between one and another quite quickly through the pandemic, and then from a film school perspective, all those different careers, like a writer, a director, a producer, a documentary maker, they're all so different, yet there is a lot that can be learned from each other. So I'd be interested to know what that feels like to move between the two.
I think for us that it is quite a steep learning curve, because we do writing for screen and writing for theatre are quite different, and we can teach both of those. But then how do you teach that, the sort of hybrid, as you say? And then thinking about performance. So we've got things like acting to a brush handle that's going to be an animated character. But how could you do something like acting on a stage with perhaps you ask a question, does everyone have to be in the same place? We had a project at John Moores, it was a dance project, Dancing Together. There were half the company were in New York, half the company in Liverpool, but on the screen it looked like they were dancing together. So the possible around that. So, and how do we sort of training people for that? That was a project that was invested in and rehearsed, and it's quite early on actually in the technology with that. There's video conferencing technology that was used there, so probably something even more advanced could be used now. But I think again, back to my sort of cross-disciplinary, I think that's for us, that's what it is. It's getting people to work more closely together to explore what is possible, doing the audience research better, and then throwing people together to come up with the ideas, and with the technologists who can add to that, enhance it, and say, well, this is what is possible, and referring back to directors. Something that I think is a big skills gap that isn't talked about much in this area is sound. So I don't know.
Absolutely. Sound. I think there are people who are when you're going to learn about these different elements of what make up the whole film, then there are people that masters of it, and they should be teaching. I think it is different if you're filming the theatre live. That's the difference. But if you're filming it as a shoot, which I did with Header and with Truth to Power, then the sound is, we use that in a way that is as in film. So, and that's great for the actors as well. And what I love about the actual thing of being able to do theatre as a shoot is you can go right in with the close-up.
Yeah, of course.
So, which is fantastic. But sound is it's very interesting because again, there was a composer, Tom Parkinson, who composed the score for Header, and I could send him the cut after we've edited and everything, and we had some of it already made, some of the sound. But then when I sent it to him, he then created the whole score as he would with a film. And these, I think, they're the elements that really need to be within that expectations, I would say. And so even if we just film, if we film a live, we get the live experience filmed, then again I think it has to be that there are things in place, like for example I did a live screening of Truth to Power Cafe for the Children's Capital of Culture, and that was supported by the Space, the BBC. And but any of the sound within that, in terms of music or any of the image within that live that we were projecting, they were all, I was directing it, so we were cutting to the actual pure elements of that, and then moving in. So that gave it that language, that film language of what you would do if you would, if you were in a studio and you was cutting between things. And so I think that's it. But the sound's a really great one, isn't it?
Yeah, and I'm just wondering about that sort of. We did an experimental project. Chris Chadwick, who you know, someone knows Chris Chag. He's worked with Paperwork Theatre with and they used a 360 camera,
Right.
and also a 360 mic, and that's the work that they're currently editing and putting. But I'd be really interested to see how that works.
Yeah, so would I.
Yeah,
that sounds fantastic.
That, would be quite innovative.
Yeah,
it must be so interesting for the performers, I think, in that sense, because what feedback have you had from your performers in that you've
amazing
worked with?
You know, that it's like you have to be open, you know, to just you have to be open. I mean, David's a film actor as well, so that, you know, he understood, you know, that hands both mediums. But I think that it's about that they need to be more versatile. You know, actors do need to be more versatile. So that's in the education, like you were saying before. I think that it crosses over now, you know, whereas it's not just acting for camera. You're actually having that sort of theatrical sense of being, you know, but in a filmic way. And I think that thing of going in is the only way that I could describe it as being something that is like that's what I'm discovering within that, about being able to go in an extreme, going on close up is the thing that is, I think it's very freeing for the actor as well, because when they're wanting to relay something that is deeply internal, then by being able to do that in a theatrical context, but having that, working with that camera to do that, you know, and the sound within that, and being able to do it more, convey it more internal, I think it's exciting.
Definitely, that's a really good thing to consider. Actually, that I hadn't thought about, is that some of the things that they have to think about with regards to just the practicalities of being in a theatre and projecting.
Absolutely.
They can show more nuances, I guess, in their emotion. I mean, for me, this is just a personal kind of interest, because I am terrible at remembering lines. I'm not a performer, never have been. I couldn't even remember the intro. I had to read it off the piece of paper. But do you think that, I think for me that would be really interesting, because if you've learned something as a script, I think the thing about being live on stage is you've got no way of, you have to remember it and you have to go for it. And then I wonder if it changes how deeply you can actually get into something, knowing that you might actually get a second shot to get that bit right. It could be quite interesting, because I'm sure there's times when live theatre performers have wished they delivered something differently, but also it maybe delivered something better because they had just gone for it. So it must be quite interesting to consider, if you've gone from being a one or the other, what losing that option is like almost.
Yes. But I think it can be a combination of live and a cinematic version of that live experience. That's what I think is exciting, because, you know, you can really capture that, and to capture that, it has to be transposed, I would say, into this language of film and theatre, and where those two things meet. And then it gives you all the accessibility that you're talking about, and so maybe that's the way, you know. So it's, because I don't think there's anything worse than seeing a filmed version of theatre where everyone's projecting.
Yeah, of course.
That's not their fault, you know.
No.
That's
I mean, what was the film? Marriage Story. That caused a lot of debate amongst theatre and cinema, because a lot of people came out of Marriage Story, because I believe the director, whose name I've blanked on, Noah potentially, they treated the set like a one-take situation, but they also allowed no ad-lib. It was like, I have written a script to be delivered in this way, as if you were performing it, like no kind of ad-lib. Even the cues, the facial expressions were very, very curated and directed. And so it was like a one shot. And of course they did get other takes, but the whole purpose was to generate that feeling amongst the performers that this could be theatre. And actually a lot of the reviews did then say it felt very theatrical in the delivery. The relationship between how they interacted with each other felt like it could have been on stage. But I remember that causing a bit of debate around, because that's kind of almost going the other way. That's a purpose-made film that's using theatre techniques. And I could see what they meant. I could see how people felt that was quite theatrical in that method of directing film. So there are kind of parallels for both, really, aren't there?
Yeah, I'm always intrigued by it. You know, every now and again a soap will say we're doing a live.
Yes,
episode will be live, and that's exactly that.
It keeps them on their toes, doesn't it? It makes it exciting and keeps it like that. I was interested in what you were saying about, you know, making the cut that was with New York and with Liverpool, because again that goes back to the origins of film, doesn't it? You know, the first where they had the coffin and the soup and the, you know, remember, sorry, it's just like these early, if you've done film studies you'll know that, where when they were going, somebody was crying and somebody looked hungry, and then they had a coffin and a bowl of soup, and people, they were in very different places, but people automatically put them together because they were following on. And I think that is the beauty of film within a theatrical context, whereas you can bring elements in and performers in from all over and mix them up. And I think that is a beautiful way of doing that. I've just done, last year I did This Is Who I Am for British Council and for London Artist Projects, and that was working with it's Singapore, with Singaporean artists who were all disabled, and I directed them all via Zoom, and then edited, you know, we edited it all, and then that went out into libraries and museums and whatever in big scale, large scale. But the possibilities for artists to be able to work with other artists globally,
definitely,
through the mediums, and I learnt so much about directing via Zoom, and it's great, it's dead exciting, you know, it's really brilliant. You know, you've got your crew there, and you're in your, you know, with your cup of tea, you know what I mean, and you're
it's such an exciting prospect, isn't it?
Really
that
is,
sustainable.
And you know, it's sadly it's getting a little bit harder to travel, I think, sometimes, and get those people over. It's getting more expensive to do everything, and I think, you know, us sending our stories in Liverpool out into the world in such a way, but also then being able to bring them in such a way that's not just a film from one person's perspective, one country, one culture, but also that they're actually worked with and directed and created purposefully for this setting is
absolutely,
you know, it's really exciting. And I think you know,
it is.
You know, if for the education setting as well, and for what digital theatre gives us as well, is, you know, arts on the curriculum is struggling at higher education level, I think, particularly high school level, and it's more accessible to be able to provide these platforms, I think, for people to engage with and to understand different ways in which theatre can be, because it's such a, you know, we all love it. That's why we're all here. We talk about theatre a lot. That's why we work in the industry, and, you know, sometimes it feels like I want more people to love it, and I do think digital stands a chance of showing people why it's brilliant.
All those wonderful things that theatre brings, you know, that storytelling, that the narrative of it, that is, you know, is not as visual. You know, it's got, and it's for the wordsmiths as well, so it's got that poetry, the poetic, and all of that.
Fab. So I think, to wrap it up, I'd be really interested to know what really you see the future of, you know, theatre on screen being, but then also how we get there and how we adapt. And, you know, we know that the audience will change and it'll fluctuate, and, you know, with regards to people wanting to watch a live performance at home, it will depend what else is on, what else is about. But, you know, it is important that this is more widely accessed, and I think, you know, the direction that we can see that digital theatre is moving through cinema and cinematic styles is very exciting, and I'm really interested to know, you know, where it's going and how we might get there and grow it even further, really.
It's a huge question.
It is. It's massive.
I think for me, collaboration is the key to all of this. If you think of some of the you know, the main productions that are happening at the moment, so we've talked about Jodie Comer, and I can't remember the name of the play, with the barrister.
Yeah, I can't remember the name of it either.
Amazing. Great. And then you think about, I don't know if anyone's been to see The Epic Voyage.
Oh yeah.
So incredible. The, you know, the money, the skill, the, you know, the brains behind that, as well as the creativity. It's just amazing. And, you know, they're two completely different approaches, aren't they, to that sort of, like, you know, one's on screen, putting the live on the screen, the other is putting something that started off as a film project and making that, you know, live experience. But what could we do to bring those skills, that knowledge together put it into that melting pot. So it's the collaboration for me. That's how we're going to get there. And I think, what is the future? I think we have to get some visionaries and some tech people together, and we have to get them to work, to come up with what is the art of the possible. It is a really big question, and I'm sure it's a really exciting world. It's just embryonic, isn't it? Now there's so much more that we could do.
Yeah, absolutely.
But the big question is, how do you get the people together with the skills and the talents to make it happen?
Amazing.
Yeah. Well, I think what the future of digital theatre is, don't throw the towel in yet. Every generation has that opportunity to move things forward, like with the silent movies, with all of that, everything, blah, blah, blah. And I think that's where we're at now. We're at that point where we go, what is it to be entertained? What is it to be an audience member? What is it to be an artist? What is it to be all of those things in the 21st century? And I think that is the most exciting place we could ever be.
Amazing. And I'm going to ask you, if you're watching this at home, the platform that you'll be watching this on, we created here at Unity as a response to the pandemic. It forced our hand, the pandemic, to think digitally, and truthfully, prior to it, there was not a lot of our work that we were recording and making more readily available. And it's something that for us is here to stay, and it's here to stay for numerous reasons, whether the audiences are there or not. And it is that accessibility, but also that engagement with you to understand better what it is that you want from the theatre industry and how theatre evolves to adapt to your needs, like we did in the pandemic, and like we will continue to do as we move through, I think, other difficult times that may be on the horizon, but also the good times and the great stories that we've got to tell. So if you've made it this far and you're still watching, please do let us know, what made you tune in? How have you engaged with this? Why have you watched it? It'd be really interesting, based off this conversation, to know, like, you're consuming a piece of digital from a theatre, but also, what other kinds of media are you consuming? We'd just really love to hear more from you, because I think, like we say, we all hope it's here to stay and here to grow, I think, is the big one, because the possibilities when we work and we learn from other industries, from the technical, from the AV, are really exciting around the different stories we'll be able to tell and what we can achieve as theatres, as theatre buildings, but also as theatre companies. So thank you so much for tuning in, and thank you so much. I think this is really, really exciting. Go on, quickly plug Header and the tour.
Oh yeah, Header afterwards, and it will be here on Saturday evening at 7:30. That's the 4th of February. And then we will be at home in Manchester on the 9th of February. That's a Thursday. And then we will be at Story House on Sunday the 26th of February. In the afternoon, that is, which is nice, a Sunday afternoon at that lovely theatre, and that's at 3 p.m, and that's the Queer Festival there. And then we are at the Arts Centre, the Rose Theatre, Edge Hill University on the 7th of March.
That is impressive, remembering those dates on the spot, because I didn't tell you I was going to ask you that. And then in terms of the different courses that the university offers and the different ways that people can get involved, what is the best way to kind of get engaged and to learn those different skills, do you think?
Okay, so have a look at our website, Liverpool Screen School, Liverpool John Moores University. One of our MAs that is absolutely squarely in this area is the MA in Immersive Media. So, come along and talk to the staff around that. Drop us an email, the email address will be on the website. Or if you're undergraduate level, media production, drama, creative writing for screenwriting, what else? Film studies we do. So have a look at our programmes. We've got quite a range. Making New Theatre is a master's as well. So lots of courses that are relevant to this area. So
Brilliant.
Fabulous.
Thank you so much. And if you've enjoyed the Roundtable series, head over to Unity Online. We've got all kinds of topics that we discuss. There's ones on there around grief and healing through the arts. There's conversations around how we talk about difficult topics, things like children with parents in the prison system and how we're giving them a voice on the stage. But then there's also some really interesting topics on there around career development. So if you're creative, looking to learn different skills, looking for opportunities, regaining confidence after periods of time potentially out of the sector. There's all kinds of discussion points on Unity Online, and we hope you've enjoyed today. Thank you so much.